We are going back to plastic today. This is the Water Street Freight Terminal from Walthers. This is one of their better kits. The molding is pretty good, has pretty good textures, it's pretty easy to put together. I also think it's one of their more popular kits. It seems to be on a lot of the model railroad layouts that I see in various videos. This is actually one of the buildings that I designed my railroad layout around, and this is the second time I've built the building. The first time I hadn't built any models in years and my skills were not very good, so I decided to try this building again. I originally had pretty ambitious plans for this kit. I was going to change out the roof and I was going to build my own custom loading dock, but the kit's really pretty good, so I decided to leave it as it is. I found this building to use as some inspiration. This is actually an old freight warehouse. I believe it's now being used as a trucking company. This is the side of the building that was against the railroad tracks. The tracks have long been removed, but note the interesting rust pattern on the doors and the crude numbering system on the doors. I believe that those concrete protrusions would have been supports for the loading dock. Since the loading dock is not there anymore, the supports have been removed. This is the truck side of the building. A detail here worth noting is the yellow corner pieces bordering each of the loading dock doors. Note here that one of the loading docks has been bricked over and a stairs and entry door has been added. This was a really good idea and I kind of wish I had implemented this in my building. Honestly, I kind of got absorbed in the build and I forgot to go back and look at the reference photos. Note that even though these loading dock doors have been bricked over to add office space, you can still see the wooden bump stop for where the truck's backed up. So let's jump right into the build. The concrete base around this building has pretty good texture, but I wanted to distress it a little bit, so here I'm grinding away some areas using the burr bit on a Dremel tool. After wearing away some of the concrete with the Dremel tool, I come back in and I fill in the holes with Vallejo sand texture. This gives the look of the exposed aggregate in the concrete. Before painting, I primed all of the pieces with Tamiya primer. For the concrete base, the initial base color was Vallejo concrete and I applied that with an airbrush. Now I'm applying Folk Art iced coffee with a sponge. Next I apply Vallejo dark brown wash. Now I'm doing a fairly heavy dry brush of Americana burlap. I think one of the secrets to painting good-looking concrete is to apply a lot of different colors and really build up a depth of color. It's also important to note that weathered concrete is really brown, it's not actually gray. After painting the walls and the window frames, I add the frames into the walls. I'm careful to scrape away the paint on the window frames where I'm going to put the glue. I know some people just put glue right over the paint, but I've never had luck with that, and the windows fall out. The building comes with a loading dock, and the base for the building has this extension which goes under the loading dock. Since I was planning on building my own loading dock, I wanted to remove the extension. Maybe one more cut? There we go. Now it's time to add the window panes. I do this using super glue gel. One thing that really bothers me in a lot of building kits is looking in a second story window and being able to see out of a first story window. So to prevent this, I'm going to add a second story floor to the building. I start by adding plastic I-beams as supports. Next, I'm going to cut the floor using the roof as a template. The floor is just black cardstock. I painted the brick walls using wrought brown from Mission Models, and that is a World War II German camouflage color. In this build, I didn't bother trying to paint any mortar in between the brick. In HO scale, I think you can make the case that the mortar is not visible, particularly with a weathered building that's old and dirty. One of the few areas of this build that's a little bit tricky is trying to get the stair assembly attached to the building wall. I wanted to add some window shades, so here I'm just gluing in some brown bits of construction paper using super glue. Here I'm gluing the concrete wall section to the brick wall section. I want to be sure to scrape away the paint where the glue surface is going to be so I get a good solid glue surface. One of the things I really hate about this process is all of the little plastic shavings it creates, and these can get stuck on different parts of the building. So I use a little handheld vacuum to suck them up as soon as I create them. It's important in this step to line up the two pieces properly, otherwise all of the walls won't fit together. Now I add the walls, and it's worth talking about the order of assembly here. Because I was putting in a second floor, I had to put the second floor window panes on the building before I assembled the walls together. I also put the first floor window panes in because it was going to be a lot easier than it would be to try and do that after the building was assembled, even though I could access the first floor windows. So at this point, all the window panes are in, but I haven't finished painting. And one of the reasons I didn't want to finish painting before I put all the walls together is I knew I was going to have some glue spots and I wanted to be able to cover those up. So where this matters is it's going to leave a little bit of a problem trying to do the painting and weathering on the building while I still have window panes in the building. Generally, it's just easier to do weathering on a building when there aren't any window panes in it. At this point, I do some final trimming on the second floor to get it to the correct size, and I can add it to the building before I add the final wall. You have to do a lot of filing to get the decorative roof pieces to fit correctly. That creates a lot of dust, so I have to vacuum that up using the handheld vacuum. These roof pieces are kind of tedious and they complicate the painting, and they're followed with more filing and vacuuming. These decorative concrete roof pieces have a lot of injection pin marks that you have to cut away. I wanted to open up some of the freight house doors, and I knew from the previous build that to do that, I really need to put a floor into the building. So I'm using some plastic I-beams as supports for the floor. Now it's time to assemble the walls of the freight building. I had some noticeable gaps in the concrete section of the building at the corners where the walls met. So rather than fill them in with putty, I decided to fill them in with Vallejo sand texture to give it a little bit of a concrete texture. Of course, I'm going to have to repaint these corners. This is where it's nice to have a set procedure for painting concrete. Now it's time to add the floor to the freight building. This is just a piece of sheet plastic spray painted gray and then kind of spray painted with a black to give some shading. The floor is not really visible, but you would notice if it wasn't there. There are some seams in parts of the office building roof assembly, so I decided to fill those with AK Interactive Rust texture. It just seems easier than using putty, and the texture adds a kind of natural grittiness to it. I added a sign decal from Dave's Decals. To make it look a little more worn, I'm applying a brick color over it with a sponge. After doing some touch-up painting to cover up the glue spots, it's time to weather the building. I decided to weather this building using artist oils. Because the base color is all acrylic paint, I sprayed the whole building with Tester's Dull Coat to act as a protective layer before I applied the artist oils. On plastic buildings like this, I prefer artist oils over water-based washes because they don't leave water spots. The disadvantage is they take a long time to dry. After applying the artist oils, I waited about a week for everything to dry before continuing on to the next step. An advantage of artist oils taking so long to dry is that you can come back a day later and make touch-ups. Here it is the next day, and I'm still able to use some paint thinner and rearrange the weathering. I've masked over the windows because I've already sprayed one layer of Tester's Dull Coat, and after the weathering I will be spraying another. I wanted to apply some graffiti to the building. This is a decal from Dave's Decals. The decal is printed on white paper, so you have to be very careful to trim all the way around the decal to get rid of the white. Otherwise, the paper will show up as a white outline of the graffiti. Of course, it's pretty much impossible to remove all of the white outline around the decal, so always plan on having to paint around the edge of the decal. I also hand painted a few bits of graffiti. Dave's Decals does give you a choice of whether you want your decal on white or on clear decal paper. You can avoid this problem if you order on clear, but then any of the white part of the decal won't show up. The next step in the weathering process is using weathering powders, and then I spray with a sealer such as Tester's Dull Coat or Tamiya Flat Clear. My original plan for the roof was just to paint tar lines directly on the roof, and I'm doing that with a thick acrylic paint from a tube, but I really didn't like the way this looked. So instead, I cut strips of black construction paper, 8 scale feet wide, and I'm gluing them to the roof using spray adhesive. Now I weather the roof using a wash of cheap acrylic paint in a couple different shades of brown. I kind of like this because the way the acrylic paint puddles, it gives kind of a realistic appearance of puddling on the roof. I try to focus the weathering on the cracks because that's where it seems to appear in real life. and the thickness of the construction paper helps keep the wash settling in the cracks. In test fitting the roof, I noticed that this one wall section was bowed in a little bit. So I want to straighten it out by gluing a large piece of plastic I-beam to the inside of the wall. The first time I built this kit, I remember having trouble with gaps in the two roof pieces on the freight house building. In this case, I'm going to have some trouble sealing those gaps because I have the floor in the building, so once I attach the roof, I won't have any way to access it from underneath. One more detail I want to add is some wooden bump stops to the loading dock doors on the truck side of the building. This is so when the trucks back up, they smash into the wood instead of to the steel plates. So here I have a piece of wood that I've dipped in an India ink and alcohol stain mixture, and now I'm applying yellow with a sponge. So here's my version of the final model. I never did build a loading dock. If you want to see 2 different ways that you can custom build your own loading dock, check out my Walthers grocery distributor kit build video. I apologize that this building is not entirely finished. As I said at the beginning of the video, this is one of the buildings that I actually designed my layout around. But I think I'm going to tear up and redo that section of the layout. So I don't know if this building is going to make it on the final version. Anyway, I wanted to finish the video because I know way more people are going to build this kit than those Craftsman kits that I normally do videos on.